the University of Central Oklahoma. And here on the home screen, you can see a link to my website if you're interested in going out and finding that. And if not, you don't have to, but I just wanted to put that up there. All right, so let's talk about AI authorship and how we keep our own voices. And here's the agenda for today. So a little bit of introduction. We'll have some polls at the beginning. I'll talk about my English composition classrooms, talk a little bit about professional writing and publication. We'll have another opportunity for some audience participation. We'll have some final ideas for using AI in writing spaces and some wrapping up time. And then there's time for questions at the end, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. All right, so I wanted to start off really quickly with what are some definitions for ethical, responsible, and transparent, and why do these matter? And the reality for a lot of us is that they're kind of, I guess they're kind of slippery, right? It depends on how you feel about certain things with ethical, and it depends on what you're doing as to how you maybe feel that things are responsible. And maybe you want to be transparent in this way in one space, but you want to be transparent in a different way in another space. And so as we think about these definitions and why they matter, that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. There are lots and lots of discussions out there about students using AI to cheat and instructors using AI detection tools. And if you've ever seen anything where I'm talking, I'm 100% against AI detection tools. I'm not making light of any opportunities for students to cheat. I realize that they're going to, but I'm much more concerned with how we can switch up our thinking about keeping our own voice and helping our students to find their voices instead of focusing on that idea of cheating. All right, so the focus of my talk today, as I said, it's not catching the cheaters, it's not using AI detection tools, but it is about asking students to be their authentic selves and asking us to be our authentic selves with them and with our own writing. And as instructors, I'm not sure how many of you are teaching writing or how many of you just have writing components in your courses, but one of the things that we can really do is we can help our students find their voices, find value and pride in their own voices as well. All right, so there's poll time. Here is the QR code. If anybody needs the link, I can paste that really quickly in the chat too. Give me just a second to do that. And this first question is active and it asks you, hold on, I'm trying to do too many things at once here. Here, there we go. All right, how many of you have wondered if a student or a colleague used something or used AI to generate something? So let's take a minute and look at that. The link is also in the chat now.
I think you may need to make it active.
We kept the register, of course, because we're not students, right?
No, you don't have to register.
Yeah, I just think you have to make the poll active.
It is.
Yeah, it's not active on your side at the moment.
It was a minute ago because I was using it. There we go.
Oh, now it is. Now it is.
That's what happens
to all of us,
right?
No worries.
All right. So, have you ever wondered if something was written by AI? Yes, by my students. Yes, about my colleagues. Yes, about a journal article or an academic text. About something else, like a news article, or not yet.
Well, I'm glad it's a select all that apply.
Yeah, I went back through and made sure that it was in fact select all. All right, so we've got a lot of people saying yes about their students, about colleagues, about journal articles, about news. Yes, okay, so we have a whole lot of yeses and very few not yets. And I'm not necessarily surprised by that because there's a lot out there that can sound AI generated, and there are some reasons for that, for how things were built. All right, so now I'm going to switch us to the next question here. So let me go ahead and activate that one. Same link. Have you ever had people suggest that you used AI to write something? So yes, but I didn't. Yes, and I did, but I hope no one would notice. Yes, and I was okay with it. Yes, I had another reaction, or not yet. Okay. All right. Good. So a small number of you are saying that yes, but you didn't use AI. A larger number are saying yes and you were okay with it. Largest number, 65%, saying not yet. And that's awesome. I'm really excited for those of you who have not had that happen yet. Unfortunately, I think that's, yeah, I know, Maha, I can't show both of them at the same time unless I switch back and forth with my screens. So that's why you all aren't seeing the results. So yeah, it's one of those things where as we sit here and we think about who's being told that they used AI, why they're being told yet. Jonathan says not yet is kind of an ominous option. I think for most of us who haven't yet been accused, it's because we're not doing a whole lot of public writing where people are seeing what we're doing. All right, let me switch back here. Sorry, so many screens. All right. So now I am going to switch my screen sharing here so that we can see the word cloud. So if you answered yes in any way, how did that make you feel? Let me move us to that question and activate that one. So you should be able to see that one, and let me share that screen. Okay. So if someone suggested that you used AI, how did that make you feel? I love how the poll tries to make you feel better about it as they're saying that, you know, hang on, people are responding. All right, so defensive. I'm guessing that lack of trust is probably together as one answer. Confused. Curious, okay. Seeing defensive getting bigger here. Oh, and you felt like it was rude. My guess is that you felt like it was rude when somebody said that to you. Okay. Sign of the times, intent, perception. Okay. Very cool. Defensive staying the biggest one and curious staying the second biggest one. That's really interesting. Okay, so let me switch back to my presentation now. All right. So I love that you all shared those things. Thank you very much for that. My response to these questions. So when people assume I'm a bot, I usually get hurt because I don't use AI for my writing, which I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. I feel devalued because I put a lot of time and energy into what I write. And then someone's like, oh, it must have just been an AI. And I've had that happen multiple times in public spaces where people have come in and made fun of me because I had a spelling error because I'm typing on my phone early in the morning, or I'm typing as I'm outside, right? And it's hard to see my screen. And so I'm just typing my answer, but people make fun of me a lot for what I write. And I'm going to talk more about that. I've also felt less human because if people think that I'm a bot, what does that say about my humanity and my value? So why did people make these assumptions? And I'm looking at you, Delve, Journey, and Landscape for starters. People look at words and they say, oh, that must be AI generated. And I know I've started doing that because people make fun of Delve so much. And so I'll see Delve in something and I'll go, oh, they must have had AI write that for them. But I'm trying to get away from that judgment space and go, well, maybe they didn't. Delve's a perfectly good word. I love the word journey. I talk about our students going on this learning journey with us all the time, or the landscape of education. So these are words that I use, but they're also words that are heavily in the data training set. So they show up in the AI generated text. And if you have those kinds of words in your writing, people may be more likely to accuse you of using AI or to make assumptions about your AI use. Wanted to share a couple of stories. One of them was earlier this past spring. It was a PhD student, and her advisor ran her lit review chapter through an AI detection tool. And it came back as highly likely to have completely been generated by AI. And the student was sitting here questioning whether she should even continue with her PhD program and even bother to finish with her dissertation because she had not used AI. And she felt violated that her advisor thought so little of her that he had run everything through the AI detector and then come back with accusations as opposed to talking to her about it, or realizing that a lit review chapter is likely to have more of those moves that might be made by an AI and so come up in more of an AI sounding kind of way. So then another one is one of my colleagues, and she's also one of my friends now. She ran her own work through AI detection tools. And she did this as part of a study. So she used herself, and I think it was one or two students, and she and those students were all neurodiverse. And then she also used some colleagues who are neurotypical. And what they found is that their work, the neurodiverse student and faculty, were more likely, much more likely to show up as AI detected, AI generated, even though it was humans writing the work. So now she is working to publish these results and to talk very openly about what neurodiversity looks like and what that means for those of us who are neurodiverse and who are writing, who are out here doing public things, and how there can be damage to students and faculty alike who are being accused of things that they didn't do. All right, so let's look at my English composition classroom. I have a lot of fun with my comp students. One of the things that English composition is really looking to is trying to privilege student voices, authentic voices. And that can be really difficult in some cases because we really want our students to sound like themselves. We want them to find value and pride in their own writing. But then you get into these classes, I'll have students come in and they'll say, I got a C on my history paper because I had 4 grammatical mistakes, and for every 2 grammatical mistakes, it dropped a letter grade or something like that. And I don't feel like that really teaches students anything, except that the only thing that matters is good grammar. And I think any of you who have read papers that maybe have some grammatical errors but make really good points, the interesting papers, versus the ones that are all grammatically correct but the points are kind of boring, right? I would much rather see my students taking these risks and making these leaps of thought and idea. And if the grammar needs a little bit of work, we can talk about that. So for me, this was hard though, because I'm a tech writer by training. And so for me, I come in and I'm like, grammar, grammar, grammar. We have to make sure that the audience doesn't think less of us or think that our information isn't valuable. So I had to kind of switch my mentality a bit on that. We have to learn to love our own voices in order to teach our students to love their voices. And we also have to see where home dialects might hurt us. So for example, I'm really well versed in Valley Girl. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I can like nobody's business. And I'm also from Southwestern Virginia, which is an area of the mountains. It's Appalachian country. And we drop our G's when we're talking very heavily. I've learned not to do those things in professional situations, because if I walk in and I'm liking everything and I'm dropping my G's and I get really casual, then people start taking me less seriously. So I've had to learn how to love my own voice and talk to my students about that code switching that we do in our different dialects, how we speak in public, how we write, what we're trying to do with our different dialects. And when I go back and I write on Medium, I tend to allow my home dialect to come through a little bit more than I do when I'm teaching, because there's a difference in the authenticity of myself in those spaces and who I'm trying to be in those spaces. So we have to really work to make sure that our students can find beauty in their own voices. It's less about grammatical correctness and it's more about relationship building. And my students know that with me. So when we build relationships with our students, we are teaching them to gain confidence in their own voices. I have a lot of students who come in and they say, my high school teacher told me I was horrible at writing, or I always got C's on all of my papers and I can't figure out why. And a lot of it was just grammar based, or they didn't do a great job with the 5-paragraph essay format. And I don't teach 5-paragraph essay at all. We move away from that. We talk about what authentic writing also looks like, which is not the 5-paragraph style. So I help them work to gain confidence in their own voices. And I also talk to them about how a C isn't necessarily a bad grade. If they worked as hard as they could and they did their best, then that's awesome. And if maybe we're moving from a C minus to a C plus to a B minus throughout the semester, that's growth. Sometimes we're also going to try things with our voices and with our word choices that fail miserably. So I try to give space for failing up or failing to learn so that students aren't going to have their grade totally tank because they tried something and it didn't work for them. We also try out AI writing tools in my classrooms, and we have a lot of fun with them. But I want them to have the space to try out the tools and not worry about failing or getting a 0 or something like that because they tried something out. And again, they failed in a way that didn't work for them, but they've learned something from it, right? And we're also critically engaging with these tools. It was a great day when we were looking at Perplexity and we were looking at the sources. And one of my students noted that 2 of the sources were Reddit threads. And so we had a great opportunity to talk about, is Reddit considered to be a valid source? And it kind of depends on what we're looking for and what we're doing. And does it maybe take us somewhere else where we get valid sources when we're looking for things that are current events or things that are happening right now? Or with our washing machine, for example, if we go find a YouTube video, maybe a washing machine video on YouTube is great, but a video where somebody's just talking about their opinions on a political issue, maybe that's not as helpful for us. So we try to really critically engage with those things. Students gain confidence when they're playing with these AI tools, trying them out, critically working with them alongside of their own writing. And I think that's really important, is it's not about replacing either the human or the AI. It's about figuring out what works for them and trying things out and saying, oh, that voice really doesn't work for me, so I'm going to change that up. This past spring, I had an opportunity to work with a first semester writing class again, and I had the students try out different large language models. So the 4 big ones, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and why am I blanking on the last one? Everybody keeps changing. Copilot. Okay. They keep changing their names, so I keep blanking on them. So anyway, each group of students worked with a different large language model, and they asked it a research question and then follow-up questions. And the research question, I consider it like the chip, and the AI response was the dip. So they're trying to get the dip into their mouths using the chip, if that kind of helps to make sense. And then they were critiquing the output from that AI and comparing it to their own writing. And it was a really interesting part of the semester. It was the 3rd paper that we did out of 4. And most of the students at that point saw their own writing as better than what was coming out of the AI. They didn't at first during the semester, but once they had a chance to really play with some rhetorical analysis and start to see what AI output looked like, then they realized that their own language choices were better than the ones from the AI. And I was really impressed with that. I am presenting the full data on this study in July. It's not quite ready yet, but I'm very excited to have the opportunity to present that later on. So when we think then moving to professional writings and publications, does any of this, talking about our own voice, transfer to our own writing? And I'm going to say maybe it does, right? Because there are a lot of reasons why maybe our authentic voice doesn't necessarily translate as well at first. So let's talk a little bit about that. All right, we're going to come back to the poll everywhere, and let me activate the next question for you all.
Laura, there are some people discussing in the chat, and especially Marwa has a question about the idea of if someone's teaching journalism or writing, how can you sort of cultivate or get along the idea of grammar and teach them how to trust in grammar? Yeah.
Thank you. We'll start there for a second. Okay, so getting around that grammatical issue. In technical writing, in journalism, I think it's a little bit different, where we have to make sure that that grammar is right because the audience judges the information and the validity of the information based on the grammar that they're getting. So I think it depends on the classroom and what you're trying to teach. But we can have students start out in their own voices, and then we can talk to them about possibly using the AI tools or not, depending on how they feel about it, to quote unquote fix the grammar depending on the audience. And we can talk to them about those rhetorical choices, about why they're making them, so that their ideas are still coming through, and letting them know that just because the AI said it was better doesn't necessarily mean it's better. I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. And have them see, okay, the AI suggested this choice, but I really like this choice instead. So I'm going to keep with this choice instead because it gives my voice more light to shine through, if that makes sense. So Marwa, I think it's a hard question, and it's a hard line necessarily to make sure that we're kind of threading back and forth. So we're saying, yes, we want your voice, but yes, we also want you to be successful.
Another question from Kirsten. She asks about the idea of, does authentic and voice always matter?
Okay, so that's a good point too. Linguistic bias is real. And we do talk very heavily about code switching. We talk very heavily about what language choices mean and why we pick certain things. We talk about how we speak amongst our friends, if we're trying to put a paper together, why we're doing it this way or that way. So again, I am talking to them about both sides of it. I'm not just saying anything goes with grammar, anything goes with spelling. You know, I had a student turn in a paper once that was about 300 words with no periods and no capitalization and no paragraphing. And I sent it back to them and I told them that they needed to format it in correct paragraph format so that I could read it. So, you know, there are some things where I'm not saying it's anything goes. I'm saying let's try and find that voice, get your ideas out there, and then change it if we need to. So for the English classrooms, we're doing less of that changing, but in history or in science or in math, we may need to do more of that changing simply because of the audience that's looking at it. So yes, it is. We have to develop both sets of those skills, as Danielle's pointing out. I'm just scooting through these really quickly. And Kristen, you're asking if personal and authentic voice always matters. Nope, it doesn't. When I'm writing reports to my provost, I don't need to be authentic. I just need to give the information that she needs to hear, right? But when I'm writing to people who are reading my Medium account, or when I'm writing my chapters, my voice matters in those spaces. So yeah, in some cases it doesn't. And that's one of the things that we also have to think about. Okay, I think I got everything. And Jonathan, we're going to talk a little bit more about neurodiversity here in a minute. Okay, so our next question here, if I can get back to that, have you used AI-generated text in your own writing? Let's see what we've got for responses here. Got some who are saying yes for course assignments, some who are saying yes for report writing. Almost over a quarter of you are saying yes for something like Medium or Substack. Yes for publication of some other kind. Yes, other. Okay. About a quarter of you are saying yes for other. And a little over 10% are saying no. Cool. That's a good range. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So let me open up that next question for you. You know, I'm kind of going through these quickly here. And activate that one. Okay, so this question here, if you answered yes in any way, how did you feel? Whoa, sorry. Technology, right? That's the one I was looking for. Okay, so how did you feel about the AI generated text versus your own writing? Did it sound like you? Did it feel weird to have AI write parts of your paper or your work? Were you worried about how people might respond if they knew? So again, this is a word cloud, and I'm going to stop sharing really quickly and share the word cloud with you, which is here. Superfluous, unfocused, squishy, generic, good, helpful, disappointed, unfocused. Okay, bland. Used it for brainstorming. Yeah. Vanilla, inconsistent. Okay. Yeah, I think, it gets really interesting when people are saying worried. And I feel like sometimes people get really worried that other people are going to judge their writing as having been written by AI, and other people don't care. And there are some real implications to that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Okay, so my next question, let me just go ahead and stay here with this for you and activate the next one. So this one, what sorts of reactions did you anticipate from either students or colleagues if they knew that you had generated some or much of the text with AI? For those of you who said yes to that question. Suspicion, concern, accepting. Surprise. It's interesting to see surprised. So like I mentioned, I don't use AI for much of my writing, and I'll talk about where I do use it. And when I tell people that I don't use AI for much of my writing, they're surprised. They're like, wait a minute, you're out here talking about AI all the time. I'm like, yes, I sure am. However, I don't find it useful for me in my writing stage. I find it useful in other spaces. So as we think about that and we think about what matters for us, that's what's really interesting to me. Okay, and I know I keep alluding to things. We're going to get to them later on here. All right, betrayal. Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the next question here, which is one more word cloud. So I'm going to stay here and activate that. Why did you turn to AI to help with the writing? That's the really interesting one for me. I see tedious. Yeah. So examples, it's faster, exploring. I'm guessing that blocked was that you were just blocked in that moment, probably. Brainstorming, communicating. Yeah. And I think that why gets really important. Stuck. Lots of people are saying stuck, apparently. As we think about that why, and we think about why we're doing it, do we give our students the same space to have those same whys as we have? Because I think if not, that can sometimes be concerning. All right, let me come back to the presentation. Oh, yeah. Sorry, those word clouds, they do some really weird things, don't they? All right. So my response to the professional writing side of things is probably, oh, it might not surprise some of you. It might. I don't know. So first off, I'm neurodiverse. Maybe you didn't realize that. Maybe you did. If you've heard me talk or if you've seen my writings, you know I've been diagnosed with anxiety, most likely from ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. Hi, and welcome to being a woman in my late 40s, right? Like, this is where we're all getting diagnosed. But that really has changed how I've come to professional writings. My authentic voice and self were not, that should say not welcomed in professional academic spaces. I'm not academic enough. I'm not professional enough. My voice is too casual, and my voice is also too short if I'm using my technical writing side. If one sentence will do, why should I use five? So I've struggled my whole life with this. often my writing was seen as less valuable because, much like with my math classes, I would come into my math classes and I would just write down the answer because I can do it all in my head. I don't need to write it down on paper. And I would be accused over and over again of not knowing what I was doing or of cheating or whatever, right? Because my authentic self wasn't seen as valuable in those spaces. It was also seen as less credible in some cases because, again, the likes and the personal stories and these kind of things that really resonate with me sometimes come across as being less credible to other people. But I love my voice. I have learned how to love my voice. And that's where I really try and help my students find their love of their own voices. And we talk about neurodiversity in my classes too, because I want my students to not spend the next 20 to 30 years of their lives not realizing that they're different in some way and that there are ways that they can make their lives easier. And AI can help to make some of that easier as well. So I didn't write much for public consumption. I'm a full professor now. I've been teaching at my current university. I'm starting my 14th year this fall. And I only started publishing when I went up for full professor because when I had tried in the past, stuff kept getting kicked back to me and kept getting kicked back to me. And I was told I wasn't good enough. So I didn't write much publicly at all because of that. And it matters because it could impact promotion and tenure. So as we think about early career academics, we need to think about them being allowed to bring the voice that they have and the person that they are to what they're writing. And I realize in the sciences especially, this can be kind of hard because nobody wants to read about who you are as a person, right? They just want to read about your results. But if we're thinking about the humanities or we're thinking about things similar to that, how are we allowing people's voices to come through? And to that same extent, are we looking and saying, oh, you didn't publish in the right journals because the right journals didn't like your voice? And I've seen people say that before, and that's not something that had ever mattered to me. I just look and go, oh, you had a publication. That sounds like a really cool title. Can I read the abstract, right? Like, I just want to read the paper. It doesn't matter to me necessarily where it was published, as long as it was peer reviewed, that's fine. Could also impact the overall ideas being heard. So if we don't like the voice of the person, and I've heard people from historically marginalized groups say this on more than one occasion, that they have a lot of trouble getting published because people see their voice or they see the name that's attached to the paper and they make assumptions. And I think sometimes this happens with our students too. We look at a student and we say, oh, well, based on your background and what I know about people from your background, you shouldn't have been able to do that. So that's a problem. So I think we have to be really careful not to put those value judgments on people because we want to make sure that we're hearing a wide range of voices and not just the ones who have the other people who are willing to accept what they're writing. Could also allow for imposter syndrome to rear its head because if you're constantly being told that your writing's not good enough or that you're not good enough, then perhaps you start to believe that and you go, well, I'm just not going to bother to write because nobody likes what I have to say anyway. So then I say AI to the rescue as a question mark, maybe. AI could make my words sound more professional, and in some cases I have done that. If I have to write something again for the provost or for the president or for those kinds of things, I do want to make myself sound more professional because I want to get policy passed. So I understand I have to play that game. So in that case, I can use AI to help me with that. Could help my words to be more acceptable as well, because maybe I'm using words that make sense to me or that I'm comfortable with, going back to delve, journey, and landscape, but maybe other people don't like those words as much or see as much value in them. But I don't use it that way. And that is, for the most part, except when I'm talking to my provost, but that's a privilege. And I recognize that and I acknowledge that. And that's one of the reasons why helping students to find their authentic voices and helping early career academics to find their voices matters to me, because I know that I have some privilege now as a full professor to break some of these rules. And I want to make sure that the way behind me does not have those same speed bumps and hurdles that I faced. So how can I help other people use AI in ways that help them to be accepted in the spaces that they're in, because others may not have that stability to be themselves in that same way. All right, so as we think about some ideas for using AI in the writing spaces, use AI generated text only in the very early stages of writing. This is what I do. So I use Claude. Like Claude, if you've heard me talk, Claude's my bestie. Love him. Like he helps me write these outlines, and yes, I'm anthropomorphizing. And I love the outlines because I'll say, this is what I have to do. This is my audience. Ask me any questions. He asks me the questions. I respond. I get that outline, and then I can really work with it. And I found that with Claude, I rarely have to change up anything from those outlines because they're so good. I didn't have that much luck with ChatGPT, which is why I switched. I do sometimes struggle to ideate clearly and cleanly at the beginning. And part of that ADHD is where I'm sitting here going, oh, this is a really interesting idea. And then I'm, 5 feet to the left, and then I'm like in a different city, and then my paper doesn't sound anything like what I wanted it to sound like. So for me, having that outline really makes a difference in how well I can get my ideas down on paper. And I have a roadmap, but that roadmap might be 100 words long, 150 words. So, half a page, maybe. And then I write 10 to 15 pages off of it. So most of the writing is mine. I'm just using it at the very beginning to help me find that roadmap so I make sure that I stay on course. We can also use tools like Perplexity or Undermined, which I was so happy that they brought back the free version of it. It's limited, but it's still there. Connected Papers, also really cool because it draws you little webs. I love it. My science students have found those to be really helpful. And we can look at these and we can say, oh, this is great. Oops, sorry. We can have them summarize perhaps for us. We can find different sources this way that we might not have otherwise found through a database search at the library. But especially with things like Perplexity, where it gives us that summary, we need to make sure that we are teaching our students that they have to be accountable for the information that is in that summary. So they have to go out and look at National Geographic or science or whatever it is about tree frog life cycles that they're looking up. And they have to read through the papers themselves and be accountable for the information that they are saying is actually out there. If you're comfortable, or if you're comfortable having your students do this, you can put your draft into a large language model with some peer review questions. You might ask it like, what main points am I missing? I love this one for students. Tell me 3 opposing views that I haven't touched on but could strengthen my argument. Or given that my audience is X, are there points that I might want to clarify or places where I've explained too much? And then again, thinking about your audience, are there places where my audience might respond poorly to the messages given how I presented the ideas? Can you give me some suggestions for ways to fix that? If we're asking both ourselves and our students to ask questions like this, that can really make the papers better. And I don't know about you all, but papers that are better are a lot more interesting to read for me. So I love the idea of having my students make their papers stronger. So I'm not reading 22 position papers on the same thing that all say basically the same things. Edit if you want to, if you're comfortable from there. So use that information to edit your revisions in some way. It can be like a peer review, again, if you're asking the right questions. And I think that that's really valid because a lot of us don't have money to go out and pay an editor to go through our papers and point out all of the things that could be stronger or that could be better. And if we are comfortable using these large language models to help us with that, that can also strengthen the papers that are going out, and we might even get more publications because of that, because we're using the language, we're using the moves that people want to see. So we can really kind of tweak our superpowers here on that editing if we feel comfortable doing that. And then use your own words to make your points your own. So if you like what AI is saying, but you don't necessarily like the words it's using about it, take that as a starting point and then go back in and fix things for yourself. And then with the personalization of AI tools, I am 100% all for AI use when it makes sense for us to do it. And I don't know how many of you have seen anything that Jason Goya and I, or Stefan Bouchard and I have talked about necessarily, or even Lance Cummings on LinkedIn, where I'll say, this is really cool that you're doing this. I don't see any value for myself in this, in that space, but I use it this way. And they're like, oh, I don't really use it that way, but I've seen other people do it this way. So the biggest part for me about AI tools, especially these large language models, is figuring out where it makes sense for us and then teaching our students how to figure out where it makes sense for them. So there's no one size fits all space for that. We need to decide where and when AI use makes sense to us. And we also need to get away from that hype and try it for ourselves. I have been struggling very hard to figure out if I want to build any chatbots. And I'm just not sure right now where there is use for me with chatbots. But again, I'm watching some of my friends out there doing these really amazing things with chatbots. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That's not going to work for what I'm trying to do. So, ignoring that hype, try out the tools and see what you find for yourself as useful or helpful. Then I wanted to give a really gentle warning here about AI generated text. And before I do that, Maha pointed out that people who are peer reviewing but actually use AI to peer review, it is awful, isn't it? Like that frustrates me because I don't want other people putting my work into AI and just using that as a kind of get around for doing the work. It's also why I don't put my students' work into AI to generate any kind of assessment or feedback. But again, I know other people find value in that. All right, so if we want to maintain our own voice and encourage our students to do the same, consider not using AI tools to help with editing and revising. And I know maybe that sounds like a horrible thing. If that doesn't work for you, that's fine. But consider, especially things like Grammarly. I tell my students not to use Grammarly because I don't like the way it outputs information. In the editing community, I don't know anybody who likes Grammarly because it gives such bad advice. So I ask my students not to use AI for the editing portion. Word hates my word choices. It is constantly telling me that I should not use this and I should use that. It's not that what I'm saying is wrong. It's just a different way of phrasing things. And that's one of the things I try to teach my students, both with Word and with Grammarly and Google Docs and all those kinds of things. If we give in and just assume that these editors are right and that we're wrong, that again can really kind of decrease our language. It condenses things down, and it can make the grammar itself really boring and the writing really boring. So I ask them not to do that because I don't want to read AI generated text that was generated in that kind of boring way. All right, so I just want to point out that AI did generate this picture for me because it decided that wrapping up meant that I must be wrapping something, and I liked the humor and the completely incorrect idea, so I kept it. All right, when we think about AI tools, that idea of the tools themselves and the critical thinking together, those are linked, right? We can't just send our students out and say, use AI tools, or send them out and say, I'm banning all the AI tool use. Please don't use it. I'm going to get you if you do. Neither one of those are good. We need to be spending time talking to our students about what works in our fields, what works in our specific classrooms. In my comp classes, it's very different than in the graduate science writing course I taught last semester. With my graduate students, we played with a lot of the tools and we talked about summarizing and we talked about what they needed to do for their lit reviews. And it was very, very different than it was with my comp students who are just learning how to really tackle that academic writing and what their voices look like. AI tools, using them, neither good nor bad on the surface of things. They're literally just tools. And I think that's another important point that we need to make sure that we understand and that our students understand too. Just tools. It's how we use them that matters. When we get into our voices and word choices, again, we need to encourage students, peers, ourselves. If we are on hiring committees, then how are we approaching the writing that those early career academics are doing? Again, are we looking only at the grammar? Are we looking only at where they're publishing? Or are we looking at the unique ideas that people are bringing and helping others to express themselves in ways that make sense to them, but then also that the rest of the world can actually read and understand? again, it is a fine line and it is a hard space to be in. Yes, student application letters too. How are we helping or not helping students to use AI in those spaces? We do still need to maintain grammar and writing standards while being open to variations. And I think, again, that gets really difficult here in the US and especially kind of in the Midwest and South. We have a lot of the African American English vernacular. And students who speak that as their home dialect may feel like they can't use that in a writing classroom. And in some cases, maybe it doesn't make sense, but in other cases, why not let them use it? Like, why not explore it in that space? It's a fully grammatically intact way of speaking and writing. So just because the grammar is different doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. And I think that's one of the things that people maybe outside of writing classes don't always think about. We have to teach ourselves and our students these things here. So anticipate audience needs, meet those needs. So again, if I'm writing to the provost, I'm going to write very differently than if I am writing to a friend or on Medium or something like that. And we need to learn how to use AI to help us, but not to replace us. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We've got about 14 minutes left for question time, so I would love to hear from you all. And I can have my chat open now so I can actually see things. So you can either chat or raise your hand or whatever. If you've got comments, I'm open for it.
There was a lot of comments in the chat earlier, but I don't think any of them were questions.
I think I got to most of them. Scrolling back through really quickly. So Yasser, you talk about code switching between different languages too. Yeah. And Maha, you've talked about that in how the AI doesn't do well with non-Western language choices, which I think is really important for us to know.
And also like what you were saying earlier about African American vernacular and then the way non-native speakers write English.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get so impressed with the output of AI and feel like, oh, I could never write that well. But it's like it has no voice, right? It's a white person's voice. And then you can't, one of the funny things that I've told students is, I know it's not you because it sounds so not Egyptian, right? But you can tell AI to write like it's a non-native speaker. They just don't think of that because they think they're going to get a better grade for sounding, like a native speaker.
Well, and in the US, if you're saying things like write like you're writing in African American English vernacular, it stereotypes it down really heavily.
Yeah, I've heard someone present on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of gross, really, when we start to look at how that language condenses down and it makes it seem like there's only one correct way, which is why I'm constantly fighting back with Word. I'm like, I will not accept your choices because I don't want to feed into that. This is the only right way. Let's see. Okay, hold on. There are some questions here. So how do you convince faculty to empower student voice and move them away from grammar and AI detection? Meg, I'm going to say that is one conversation at a time and one presentation at a time. And I wish it were easier than that. But what I am finding is that when I talk with faculty, when I work with them in my workshops, when we have one-on-ones, when they come to presentations around campus, that they start to see that it's not all about AI detection. But I also think another thing that we have to keep in mind is that especially if we're dealing with adjunct faculty or we're dealing with people who are teaching for 4 teaching loads, we are looking at people who are stressed, who have a lot on their plates, or like we just had to push back. They tried to raise the caps on our composition classes to 26 students. We maintained at 24, thank goodness, but even 24 is huge. And it's really hard to say, okay, you need to redo all of your assignments and all of your classes so that you have everything that's less AI-able, if you will. So it's a matter of having those conversations over and over again. Let's see, Kristen, do you have any suggestions for teaching larger courses? Sort of. One of the things that has been useful to this point is doing things that are group. So having group papers, group presentations. You know, if you've got a class that's still under like 60 students or so, then you could have that group presentation and then everybody has to answer questions at the end. So you know that they have at least done something with it, with the information, and had some exposure to it. But you're right, the larger the classes get, the harder it becomes to un-AIify things, if you will, or help students on an individual level and create all of those relationships. So Kristen, you're coming at me with the hard questions today. I will also say, Kristen, that one of the things that I have done is I've got the annotated PDFs that some of you all may have seen me talking about. It's on my website, which I will type back here in the chat really quickly. But with that assignment, students have to turn in an annotated PDF for every single source that's in their paper. So even if the AI does help them with the writing, I know that the students have engaged with the research in some way. Yes, I know that AI can go in and do the annotations for them, but I haven't had a problem with that yet. But what I ask students to do is highlight some of the quotes that they use. So which quotes did you use? Tell me why. Tell me, did it lead you somewhere else or give you some new ideas? And that is something that I give, 10 points of credit for, 15 points, kind of depends on how many annotations they're turning in. It's shorter than an annotated bib, and it's less likely that AI is going to do that. But again, with a large class, that's a lot to grade. So yeah, let's see. Resources to help us better check our own reactions to diverse writing. I actually don't know, Veronica, if there are. Does anybody else know? Are there ways to do that besides just continued exposure?
I'd say interact with a lot of diverse people and get their feedback, sort of thing. Like it's a long-term type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say I have been doing heavy pedagogy work now, like going to every single book group I could possibly be in for about the last 10 years. And it has incrementally changed how I view writing and how I view student work, but it is incremental. It is one book at a time, one workshop at a time. And one of the other things that I do is I talk to my own students about that. So we had a conversation a few semesters ago. I know it was during COVID, but it was physically in the classroom, where we were talking about words like melting pot and don't leave me hanging, and how these kinds of words actually reinforce racism. And I got some of the biggest fights I've ever had from students saying a melting pot's not a bad thing. And I said, well, but what does it mean to be a melting pot? What's happening when we smelt the ore? We're burning off all the impurities so that there is one just plain basic piece of metal without impurities in it. And so when we talk to our students about that, I think that that can also help us to just get better at recognizing these kinds of things. Let's see. So Buchanan, let's see, using AI for the ideation. Okay, right. So there are times when we want our students to struggle with drafting. And there are times when we want them to struggle with ideation. And if that's the case, if the struggle is what matters in that moment, number one, we need to make that clear to our students. So I wrote something earlier last week, and I could have gone to AI to do it, but I needed to slog through that mud and just sit there unhappy for a little while in that mud in order to get to the other side of my ideas and to understand what I thought about it. So I think if we can explain to students that sometimes we just really need to struggle, then they're more willing to do that with us. And if we really want them to do that, then keeping in mind accessibility issues, we can come into class and we can say, okay, students, today we're going to spend 5 minutes brainstorming on your own. And then we're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes in small groups discussing your brainstorming ideas. And then we're going to come together as a large group and we're all going to share out our ideas so we can learn from each other. So in that case, we can bring it back into the classroom and we can show them kind of what happens throughout the struggle and why that matters. One of the things that I do sometimes with my comp students is I have them speed date their ideas. So everybody has 40 seconds to talk to your partner, and then they talk for 40 seconds, and then you switch and everybody talks all the way around the room. And they have a chance to see how their ideas shift as they're talking to 6 to 10 other people in the classroom about their ideas. So again, just making it obvious to them why we want them to struggle is really important. And Meg, I'm sorry that your caps just went up too. That's really rough. Yes, Jonathan's asking about the environmental impact of AI. And I talk to my students about that too. We talk about water use and power use and what that looks like. And that's actually one of the reasons why I don't use AI just to build recipes or to play around. I only use it when I need it because I don't want to contribute to the environmental problem any more than I necessarily have to get past my roadblocks, if you will. So I do talk to them about what those different environmental impacts look like. I've got a podcast that I'm bringing in the fall that I think was from Marketplace News Report. I've got it saved somewhere. So talking to them about that and helping them to understand. One of my friends has said that those conversations are really very impactful with her students to also get them to move away from just using AI for everything and really being aware of how that AI can help or not help them. And we are about out of time. Jonathan, yes, Melting Pot is talking. If you look at some of the discussions about racialized language, it is talking about burning off the impurities so everybody is the same. And then Don't Leave Me Hanging goes back to the reference of people swinging from trees, so lynching. And it's really, it does become problematic. Maha, I talk about it like a stew, right? So we want the carrots to maintain the carrots, and we want the potatoes to maintain the potatoes. We don't just want it all to get blended together.
I use salads, so similar.
Yeah, salad. I like that too.
I think there's another question that you might have missed. You just have 3 minutes. Maybe you want to answer that one.
Yeah. Was there, let's
by
see.
F?
Hold up. Oh, F. Okay. How do you think our writing will be impacted when AI is more widely integrated? Okay, so I'm really honestly quite excited to see what the iOS 18 update looks like in July. But I also am concerned for my faculty member colleagues who have not made any changes to their assignments yet, because our students are going to walk into our classes with AI in their pockets or on their computers as they're doing things in class. It's just going to be everywhere. And I think that the way that writing is going to be impacted really depends on how we set it up in our classrooms. Do we set up why writing matters? Maybe writing doesn't necessarily matter that much, like in our own voices or having us struggle through it. Again, like when I'm writing a report, I don't need to struggle through that. I can have AI do that. It can offload it. I can have AI build a lesson plan for me, but I'm going to go back through and double check that it's actually right and says something good. So I think thinking about what we want from our writing and showing students the problems, like where Gemini was telling people to put glue on pizza or those kind of things, that's very important too, just to show them some of the problems. So I think I've got like 30 seconds left. So
yeah, catch that last question. It's a good one.
Okay, hold on. I have interesting paragraph. Do you have suggestions on how to encourage them to see the value in their own writing? Yes, I do. So I meet with them for conferences if they choose to meet with me. And what we do is I have them put all of their AI generated writing in red text. And yes, I realize that's not always accessible, but it's worked for me so far. And then what I do is if students have those large blocks of red text, like their intro paragraph or their conclusion paragraph, I look at it and I say, oh, that voice doesn't really sound like yours. Can you see where it doesn't sound like you? And students go, yes, it totally doesn't sound like me. It didn't really get at what I wanted. And so they see that, and then they go back in and fix it on their own, which is really cool. But those conversations really help. Okay, I did it, 11:30. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was great to talk about authorship and all that.